So the class of 2024 from Major League Baseball, voters have been in, and I've never really quite understood this concept. And it's a panel of voters. You got to get above a 75% in order to be voted in to the Hall of Fame of that year. You get 10 years of opportunity. And then afterwards, if you don't get in, it's going to be up to a panel of writers that are like 10 years later to determine if you're worthy enough to get in. And I just didn't quite understand that. It's either a yes or it's a no. You get, and if you don't know, you don't have a choice. You just don't vote. And so you're really just marking a yes or leaving it blank. And so there's a handful of guys that have been selected for the Hall of Fame this year. We saw Gary Sheffield, tremendous ball player, I believe, in personal opinion. He did not make it in. This was his last and final year. And now it's going to come up with some writers, or it's going to depend on some writers, 10 years down the road from now to determine if he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I'm sure those writers in 10 years probably really don't have a case to put him in to the Hall of Fame, which bugs me. Now I provide a little sweet spot when it comes down to Hall of Famers, because I do like the I do like I think a lot of ball players have earned the opportunity, but there has to be an elite line of saying, what have you done this year? Or I think there's a lot of factors being played. How long have you played in Major League Baseball? How long have you, what were your, stats? Who did you play for? What did they do during the time that you played on their team? How did you contribute to their success or failures? Then I'm looking into in comparison, because the game has changed over years. How did that, you have to look at it at a narrow window. Andrian Beltre, for example, played, all these players. Andrian Beltre, Joe Mauer, Todd Helton has all played in a time where, you didn't have the pitch clock. You didn't have the runner on second and extra innings. The dimension to base, to fielders were, still being discussed and compromised. So, but I just, for me, there's a bit, there are plenty of players that probably deserve to come, to be put in, and they haven't been put in. So let's kind of start talking about who we see this year. Now, I'm actually going to take, we see three players. The first one is Andrian Beltre, excuse me. He is a third baseman. He batted, mainly played for the Texas Rangers, played for the Dodgers a bit. But his WAR was finished off at 93.5. He had a total of 11,068 at-bats, a total of 3,166 hits, 477 home runs. He batted 286, which I think is pretty solid. He had scored in 1,524 runs. He's also held an RBI 1,707, 101 stolen bases, 339 OBP, and a 480 slugging. And I think certain numbers really stand out, like the batting average, slugging, on base percentage. He was he did provide a threat. He was also a good conversation piece when, you went into town. I remember watching, like, when I went out to Padres games in San Diego back in the day, like 10, 15 years ago. You get the program, which was actually like a magazine, and they don't necessarily have that anymore, which I'm disappointed, which basically it updated your roster, who was active and whatnot throughout the course of the year. And I still have those magazines, and it gave you information about the coaches, about the schedule, about your broadcast team, about some of your sponsors throughout the year. Maybe they picked a player or two to kind of do interviews and backgrounds on. It kind of included a poster that you could hang up. You wanted to go once a month to get the new edition of the poster to have all 7 posters. Well, in that, you'd get, here's what to expect this month. All right, we're facing the Rangers, the Red Sox, Minnesota. And their dangerous person is Adrian, for the Rangers, it's Andrian Beltre. Red Sox is, David Ortiz. And then you got, for Mariners, Joe Mauer, right? And they just kind of give you a description. So whenever I took a note, whenever you got a chance to be in, as, hey, you are considered as a threat or as a key highlight, hey, I'm coming into your town, I think you have to go without being noticed. And Adrian's one of those guys, that I think when you went into town, he's left his mark on teams. And so a nice, worthy enough, area that he's been able to, gain this, become a Hall of Famer this year. So I'm excited to watch that. Relate this to, to Hall of Famers, because you've had to do something right in your career if you were going to be a Hall of Fame of any class, of any sport or anything like that. We've seen it where maybe you'd question some Hall of Famers, like the WWE Hall of Fame. It's in my eyes, it's something that I think has gone a little far from what it should be, because Hall of Famers in my eyes is someone who's left an impact on that sport or whatever that category is. He's changed the game. It's a him or her has, male or female, has changed that game to better it some way or to thrive some way. You take a look at like the music world. Eminem is a Hall of Fame in my book. He's changed the game of music. George Strait, Garth Brooks. You take a look at Tom Brady. We've seen some of the greats with Peyton Manning. He's left a legacy and changed the game. You look at baseball. I feel like the voting is just a bit off, not too far from where it could be or how it's supposed to be, but definitely a lot better than maybe what we see with like WWE in that standpoint. So we talked about before the break, Andrian Beltre being one of the inductees this year. Then we go to Joe Mauer. We talked, and I explained before the break that magazine at Petco Park you get every month, and inside the magazine you get upcoming opponents with a key player to look out for. And Joe Mauer was on it every time Minnesota came into town. Joe Mauer, man, what's interesting about these Hall of Fame classes now is that there's a lot of these guys that I grew up when I was breaking myself into becoming a baseball fan. And for the longest time, up until maybe high school, I was getting into, all right, I'm only watching Padres baseball. I only know about Padres baseball. Everyone else was kind of a blur to me. I don't think it was until I got into high school where I really understood how many teams there were, who was on what team. And I started getting into all of that great stuff. But Joe Mauer was not a stranger when it came down to being a threat to the plate. He had great at-bats. His WAR was pretty low, 55.2. At-bats, 6,930. Hits, he's had 2,123. Home runs, he's had 143. His batting average was a 306. He scored 1,018 runs, RBIs 923, stolen bases 52, OBP is 388, slugging percentage is 439. So to me, what pops out of my attention, what gives me my attention here, is that Joe Mauer had a higher batting average than Andrian Beltre. And I think that's, when you try to separate, okay, well, why is Andrian Beltre in and compared to Joe Mauer, and you get to the category of here's the numbers, I think a 388, OBP and a 439 slugging combination is a great, residue of, hey, this is what he put out. You see the batting average of 306, and sometimes batting average of 306, especially back in the day, was more difficult to handle. We remember back with Tony Gwynn back in those days. So Joe Mauer, another great, he was a catcher from Minnesota. I think he was like, you don't see a lot of careers staying in one team. I think that's kind of gone these days. Mauer has definitely made it at a point. I mean, he kind of ended it for Minnesota. You can relate to Joey Votto when it's time for him to join, if he doesn't get picked up by another team. But that's just something, also an era that we won't see one person with a team most likely for their entire career. First baseman Todd Helton. Ooh, I remember Todd Helton, Colorado Rockies. A lot of great stuff out of him. He put up some good numbers. 7,962 at bats. He's had 2,519 hits with 369 home runs. Batting average left off at 316. His RBIs is 1,406, 4 more than his run score, which is 1,401. Wasn't really too much of a base threatener. He was really mainly for his defense, his control at first base, and his at bats. OBP was 414, and slugger was 539. And I think you gotta have to give that to him. No, if you look at where he played at Coors Field, hitter's ballpark, right? It's also another thing to hit a lot of your home runs. But and I was listening to a little bit of Todd Helton's story when he got informed about, interviewed about being in the Hall of Fame. He related back to Tony Gwynn, and I was just listening to it, and it was talking about, he was being asked was how were you able to hit all those home runs? How were you able to maintain contact with the ball? And he mentioned Tony Gwynn taught him a lesson or gave him the best advice. He was like, where are you looking at when it comes down to locating the ball? And, Helton responded and I guess said, oh, well, I was looking at, the bill of the cap, or I was looking at the arm. And Tony Gwynn says, man, you're doing it all wrong. You want success at bats, you pick one spot, and then when the delivery goes, you just kind of move it over just a little bit. Or else you're going to be all over the place. And it makes sense to me. If you're not a baseball reference guy, then I would understand otherwise. But hitting, you kind of focus in on one thing. Maybe it's a letter. You try to focus around where you can eye the ball. So you're focusing maybe on the bill of his cap. I think that's a saying that a lot of people do. Maybe you focus on the left shoulder or the right shoulder, depending how he throws, and that way the focus point stays the same, right? And that there's not a lot of movement in the delivery process, and all you got to do is shift just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right to locate the ball. But what I think I enjoyed about that story more was the fact that you have Todd Helton in Colorado, Tony Gwynn in San Diego. You're elaborating, and I didn't necessarily quite see that quite often. But then to see, and I guess you love always. There's not a bad Tony Gwynn story out there, in my opinion. So, maybe because it had to do with Tony Gwynn, I don't know. I just give in. And then we also have to congratulate manager Jim Leyland. He's managed for Pittsburgh, Miami, Colorado, Detroit throughout his tenure. He's recorded 3,499 games, and in those games, he's won 1,769. He's lost 1,728. So right off the bat, he's already done his due diligence by having a winning record as a manager. His winning percentage was .506. In 22 years, in those 4 teams, he's held 6 division championships, 3 pennant titles, and in 1997, he's won the World Series. He was a manager of the year 3 times, and he's one of 8 managers to do so in both leagues. I didn't necessarily grow up watching Jim Leyland, but he was a name that was brought up quite often in relations, and it's definitely. I know it's not easy to be a manager of a ball club. I don't think, especially 22 years. I think the tenor of a manager has declined recently because teams want to win now, not just you stick with the process. Like you see with, and that's rare because then you see like Bruce Bochy in there and it's like, okay, well that's one exception. A lot of times as we see managers today, they're kind of moving on at a rapid pace. And it's like, if here's a 3 to, it's like head coaches of the NFL. They're, I don't think you could have a longevity career unless you're just that good. Mike Tomlin is probably like the last of this era. I mean, okay, then you see John Harbaugh, so maybe he's up there in the conversation, but you rarely see in 10, 15, 15 years as a head coach with an organization. Same thing with the manager. David Bell, I mean, he did get his contract extension, but I get that feeling that if David Bell and the Reds does not produce a playoff run or even a World Series run within his contract time frame, that I think they're going to move on from him. The Padres signed Bob Melvin, and I think at the very beginning of this contract deal, it was such a, all right, he's going, he has the right mindset. Well, did he? Because he barely lasted 2 years with the Padres. Didn't do anything significant. Matter of fact, took steps back. And now the Padres have Mike Schultz as their skipper. So that, if you're a team club like, the Yankees, we have Aaron Boone. I think you can afford, as long as there's some sort of success, that they don't change what's not broken. Like the Dodgers, Dave Roberts. Dodgers are always good. Go to the playoffs. You're not pointing fingers at anybody. Yeah, you can't win the World Series, or you could do it on a shortened season, but you're not pointing fingers at Dave Roberts. A lot of fans want to, but then no one's going to do it. At least not anytime soon. So, but congratulations to those 4 inductees this year. You get down to Cooperstown, and you get a chance to hear all their stories. You get a chance to hear them as a human being instead of a professional athlete. And it's the hard work that pays off. It is what I think thrives a lot of people. I think it thrives today's ball players. I know a lot of players playing today grew up watching, these guys, and to see that they can make it to the Hall of Fame, it's like, all right, now I have a chance. I mean, you look at guys like Manny Machado, and when you look at guys, especially players that are in different, regions of the country making it to the Hall of Fame. I mean, Ichiro Suzuki is going to be a Hall of Famer, and I think he's played a huge impact on how baseball has been changed today. So, congratulations to all four of those guys. I can't wait to see them being inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. All right,